Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Farmers Insurance Open. You got 2 courses on the rotation, so you're gonna make sure you're ready for both the North and the South course this week with all of the key stats, a hole-by-hole breakdown, some custom modeling, some comp courses to help you out with all your research to try and find some of those outright plays, some DFS plays over there for Draftkings and all that sort of jazz. So by the end, you'll be an expert on the golf course this week and what to expect over there for the Farmers. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in. But first off, a look at some of those tournament details. We're back to a regular 36-hole cut, but we do have 2 courses in play. So players will be at the South course and the North course for days 1 and 2, 1 round on each of those 2 different venues before they play the South course for the weekend if they make the cut. And the South course is the main one, the one that you've seen out there for US Opens, other major championships, and is a lot tougher than what you have on the North course. So they're both par 72s, but what you'll see, the main difference there is that one is 7,700 yards and the other one is under 7,300 yards. On top of that, the greens around the South course are a lot trickier than what you have at the North side. So over the first 2 rounds, the key to really going out there and making the weekend is having a low round at the North course. But for the sake of our modeling, for going out there and trying to find our outright plays, the South course is the one you want to focus on. It's there for 75% of the event, and the one that for a majority of our focus here is going to be the one under consideration. The greens over there at the South course are POA Anua. It's the first time here on the West Coast swing that we're getting pure POA greens. In the rough, it's the first time we're really getting any substantial rough. It's a 4-inch ryegrass overseed this week. It's some of the nastiest stuff that we have around the PGA Tour. So when you're missing the short stuff, which happens a whole lot around this golf course, you're going to have a really tough time getting into the greens. It might not be as thick as what you have for major championships here, but it's really tough to get it up around the green when you're hitting out of that 4-inch rough. You also have some really tricky greens around the South course. They're not massive at only 5,000 square foot, but they are easily 3-puttable. So we'll see that with the averages. You see a little bit more 3-putts, even though they're only 5,000 square foot, and not a whole lot of water in play around this golf course. There's really only 1 hole where you have that water in play, and it's one of the par 5s on the finishing stretch. Rest in peace, Bryson DeChambeau, who fell victim to that a few years ago, but it's a really fun golf course to go ahead and take down. If we take a look at the North course, give you some of the details over there, the agronomy is a little bit different on that side of the property. You do have pure bent grass greens as opposed to the POA on the other side. You still have that 4-inch ryegrass rough and a little bit of larger, softer green complexes. So not only are they going to be easier to hit, but they're also a lot easier to putt, hence why you get so many low scores around that venue. But if we focus on the South course, again, the main one for this week, pretty much every average that we have over here in Bet the Number is going to be harder than your PGA Tour average. Of course, guys, sponsor of this video, Bet the Number, is giving us all of these course analytics to look at. The fairway percentage is a whole 6% lower than your PGA Tour average. In fact, 6.5% right there. You hit a few less greens around this venue. It's harder to scrambler than your PGA Tour average. You have more 3-putts than usual. You name it, right? Every average that you can see on this screen here is a little bit harder than your PGA Tour average. Maybe most notably the bogey or worse average, which is well over 3 per round. And if you take a look at some of the leaderboards around this venue, we're going to touch on this even more when we get to the custom modeling and key stats later, but it's a whole lot of ball strikers. If you take a look at the top 10 from last year, almost all of them were bombers off the tee, except for Nate Lashley down there in T3. But you had guys like Kevin Yu, among the longest players on tour. Ober's a bomber. Same thing with Pendrith, we know that. And even guys like Bo Hostler that lost strokes off the tee last year had plenty of length off the tee, right? It's not like Dumpy Bo is short off the tee by any means. And if you take a look at the year before that, it's going to be that same kind of trend. Really, the only short player that we have up there would be somebody like Colin Morikawa, who, of course, is an elite driver when it comes to the accuracy. So this is a ball striking heavy week. A lot of your top level players like showing up here because it is such a demanding test off the tee. If you're missing the fairways, it is becoming a par game from that point in, and your world's best players that are used to taking on that kind of test over there at major championships are normally the ones that we see showing up here. So, John Rahm back in 2023, you saw up there in the top 7, but let's look at this top 7 from 2023. Tony Finau, John Rahm, Jason Day, Sahith Theegala. I mean, really the only one up there that's not an absolute stud is Sam Ryder, and he finished in T4th. By the way, was leading that event for a lot of that year, so he had all these studs go ahead and pass him up. By the way, we hit a Max Homa outright that year, which was pretty sweet back there in 2023. And then the year before that, the mother of all outrights that we've hit at this event. There's a reason why I love the Farmers Insurance Open. We hit Luke List at 150 to 1 back there in 2022. But if we take a look at this leaderboard, it is all ball strikers. I mean, Tringale, a little bit short off the tee for sure. Same thing with Pat Perez down there. Of course, both those guys over there on the live golf side, but Luke List bomber. Will Zalatoris hits it a long way and plays these difficult golf courses as well. Jason Day has some of the best course history imaginable around a Torrey Pines. It's pretty much all good drivers of the golf ball that are T10 or better. So that's the kind of test that we have here. It's a major championship type of golf course, and you're going to see those sort of players funneling their way towards the top. If we take a look at some of the course analytics down here towards the bottom, they've got all 14 holes as driver holes this week, which I tend to agree with. Maybe hole number 2, you take something less than driver off the tee, but a lot of your shorter guys are going to force driver down there as well to try and pick off a birdie. So I think if you have the length, it is a massive factor around here because you're only going to hit 53% of fairways. Even your most accurate players might hit like 60% of their fairways around here. And what's far more important is having a shorter club into these green complexes and also the swing speed to get through some of that rough. So you'll see that we're really focusing on the driver with our key stats later. Your approach profile is skewed towards the longer clubs. The last few weeks, we've had a majority of our shots coming from 50 to 175. And you can still see that there's a lot coming from 126 to 175, but this 50 to 125 range is utilized a lot less than what we normally see. Typically, it's closer to 5.5 shots per round, but it's just at about 3.5 shots per round up there at the top. A lot of those shots have gone to 175 to 225, and then even that 225 plus range, which is going to be especially useful out there on the par 5s. But if you end up missing the fairway on one of those longer par 4s, you could also have a shot out there from that range. So that's why it's almost at 5 shots per round from 225 plus. Your par 5 scores are going to be at a big advantage this week as well. Around the green, there's not that much to note. It's a pretty balanced test. You've got some green side bunkers, some of that 4-inch rough around the green, also some fairway areas, chipping hollows, so you can't really focus on one specific grass type. But with the putting, what you'll notice is that it's harder than your PGA Tour average. If we go to the make percentages at each of these different ranges, you're going to see that it's lower than your PGA Tour average. So from 0 to 3 feet, it's about 0.5% lower. It's almost a whole 3% lower from 4 to 6 feet. A lot of that because of that POA greens and the fact that they bud throughout the day. But from 7 to 10 feet, I mean, this is just nuts over here. It is a whole 6% lower in terms of your make rate. From 11 to 15%, it's only about a 2.5% difference. But this 7 to 10 foot range, making those putts on those POA greens are extremely, extremely difficult around here. And perhaps that's how a Luke List went out there and won. He's far from the best putter that we have on the PGA Tour. Maybe that's why Will Zalatoris plays so well around this golf course when you have these tricky greens. I mean, heck, Colin Morikawa in 2023 was an absolute dog shit putter. Keegan Bradley, same thing in 2023. It's not like they were lighting it up on the greens. These sort of guys show up at this golf course because you don't have to make a whole bunch of putts to go out there and win. Nobody's making those 5 to 15 footers in the afternoon. So setting up those birdie looks and giving yourself a chance at par is really what's going to separate yourself from the field. So that's what we've seen around here. I have a pretty good gauge on what to expect around here with some of those outrights we've hit. But now let's go hole by hole, show you guys some of the shots around the Torrey Pines South course and what you can expect players to face this week. If the golf course was easy to hit fairways on and we didn't have 4-inch rough, it probably wouldn't look that bad from the overhead view, but we're going to have to remember that for every single hole here as you get a little bit out of position and you're going to be absolutely screwed. And hole number 1 is a perfect example of that. It plays slightly downhill out there for the tee shot. You've got fairway bunkers in play on both sides there, so some players may choose to stay short of those and make sure that they have something out of the short stuff, but if you take a driver on, you can see how tough it is to hit the short stuff. A lot of people are going to miss past this bunker to the left or in one of those fairway bunkers towards the right side. The green complex isn't all that special, at least compared to some of the other ones that you have around this golf course, but you can see here the variety of different shots that you can hit. You miss short, you're going to have a shot out of the fairway. You miss to the left or the right, you're likely going to have a bunker shot. And if you end up going long, you're going to be hitting a chip shot out of that 4-inch rough that is downslope for most of those pin locations. Hole 2 is 392, so I mentioned this as a potential layup before, but I think you're going to see a lot of people hit driver here as you don't have a whole lot of opportunities around the Farmers Insurance Open. If you're going to go out there and pick off a birdie early, if you hit a 3-wood and can find a way to needle it between these bunkers, you're going to have less than 100 yards in. 3 is a 200-yard par 3. This is a really tough green to hold because of how narrow it is from front to back. So a really tough test, and a lot of people are going to be chipping from over the back. 4 is 489 yards. This is a very stiff par 4. It actually plays a little bit uphill as well, so you can start to see where the length really comes into play. And if you miss the fairway to the left, I mean, first off, you're in a canyon if you miss too far left. But if you end up missing in the rough on either side, like, good luck hitting a 200-yard approach shot into a green that is that awkwardly shaped. Hole 5 is 457. This is, I would say, one of your like medium difficulty holes around here. Like, the tee shot can be hard, especially because most people have to hit a driver here. But even if you're in one of the fairway bunkers, I would prefer that over having to hit out of that 4-inch rough from about 160, 170 yards. Hole 6 is your first par 5. It is a dogleg from left to right. The longer hitters can take a much more aggressive line off the tee. So just to show you that, your longer players are probably aiming a little bit closer to here, which could leave you about 210 yards in. So these par 5s, they're going to be a key part of your scoring this week. It's something that we're going to focus on from the key stat perspective, because if you're going to make birdies, it's holes like 2 where you can go out there and take advantage. And then really other than that, it's holes like the par 5s. Hole 7 is 465, also a dogleg from left to right. A tough tee shot, especially if you miss on the inside half, because you've got that 4-inch rough and then also a tree that obscures your view of the green. Hole 8 is 177 yards. This is also a relatively narrow green complex. So though the tee shots here on the par 3s are really hard, it really comes down to pin location. Like, some pin locations can be absolute death on these par 3s, whereas like a front right pin location that's much less protected is a whole lot more scoreable for these players. Hole 9 is 617 yards. This does play downhill, so it's going to play a little bit shorter than the scorecard yardage, but unless you're one of the biggest, longest players on the PGA Tour, you're probably not reaching that one in 2. Hole 10 is 457, so it's a pretty stiff test. If you're starting on 1 or 10, you're going to get a good test right out of the block, and it looks pretty similar to hole 1, if you do that comparison. Hole 11 is 225. It's one of these longer par 3s. Occasionally, they'll move up the tee box here at 11 to make it a little bit softer, but if it's played from the back, one of the harder holes that you have out there, especially with how awkwardly shaped that green is. Hole 12 is 506 yards. This reminds me a lot of the 480-yard par 4 that you had on the front. You have these bunkers, which they're going to be really tough to reach the green into if you're into them, because you're hitting, a 4-3-4 iron out of those greens, and it's hard to get the elevation that you need out of those bunkers. And another just brutally difficult hole. 13 is a super long par 5, so I think you guys are getting the point here. Like, even the easy holes, it'd be really nice to have that length, to have a shorter club in. If you're going to take advantage of these par 5s, if you're somebody like Peter Malnati, it's a 3-shotter in almost every single case, except for the first one, which is hole number 6. 14 is 437. This one's slightly doglegs from right to left, but believe it or not, this is one of the easier opportunities that you have, especially if it's in a pin location that's not tucked towards the back left or the back right. 15 is 518 yards, just a brutal long par 4. If you miss to the left, you're screwed with those trees blocking you out. And if you miss to the right, you're behind that little bush as well. It's also not a really good spot to be in. 16 is 228, another long par 3. All of them are long around the south course. 17 is 443, so this is more of a scoreable par 4. It's maybe the one opportunity that you'll have coming down the downstretch, something from about 150 yards into the green. And then finally, you finish off with the only hole that has water in play. It's, of course, your finishing par 5. And going for this green in 2 is only reserved for the boldest of players, because this green complex is maybe the most severe that we have on the entire course. And if you miss long, a lot of people are going to hit it through the green and into the water there. So this is a risk-reward hole. It's fantastic as the finishing hole at this golf course. Gives you a little bit of variance there towards the very end. And if you have to make up 2 shots, it's one of the few golf courses where that is actually going to be feasible. So I love this course. A lot of different shots that are required, but you got to be a bomber to go out there and take advantage. It's just one of those weeks, and the shorter guys, it's going to be a tough one out there for those sort of players. Now that we've seen the golf course, let's go through some of the key stats for this week and what Bet the Number is looking for in their players. And I love the Bet the Number model this week because it's pretty much exactly what I was going to run beforehand. This is a ball striking heavy course, and their number one key stat this week would be your shots gained ball striking. So we can look at some of your leaders there. Of course, ball striking is just a combination of your shots gained approach plus your shots gained off the tee. Luke Clanton towards the top end of the list. A little bit of a small sample size popper though. Players that have been playing a little bit more consistently would be guys like a Johnny Vegas, JG Spawn with his recent hot form, Kurt Kitayama, Aaron Rye, always. Some of the more consistent ball strikers that we see out there in Tour are going to get a pretty sizable boost this week. So maybe a few names that you didn't expect to see would be a Mac Meissner up there towards the top of that list. A Joel Damon has also been hitting the ball a lot better recently. Are all going to get a slight little bump out there in the model for this week. The next key stat would be carry distance, which is just going to give us an idea of a player's firepower off the tee. And because of how many fairways everyone is going to be missing, you're going to get hardly any rollout. So your driving distance a lot of times is just going to be your carry distance around a Torrey Pines South course. So Aldrich Polkgutter, you're going to see him a lot in the future. Maybe not so much this year as he's still a little bit raw, but a super long player off the tee. He can carry it. You can see there 315 yards, but I've seen him do a whole lot more than that over there on the DP World Tour. A few other guys that get a little bit of a boost in this category would be a Joseph Bramlett, Trevor Cones long off the tee, Taylor Pendrith, who we're going to be talking about a lot here. He's the number 3 model ranking play over there in the Bet the Number model. We're all going to get a significant boost here, which we already told you that was going to be the case, but carry distance, another thing to look at on top of just regular driving distance, because at a course where you're only going to hit 50% of the fairways, if you're a player that's a low spin, lower ball flight player that maybe gets a lot of extra rollout when he's hitting the fairways, you're just not going to get that around this golf course. So I'm glad that they made that distinction there with that carry distance. They're also looking at approach from 175 to 275. They did narrow that down to looking at shots out of the fairway, rough, and bunkers. So just trying to make it more suitable out there for this golf course. Towards the top end of the list, you have Harry Higgs, not a name that I was expecting to see up there. A few small sample size players like a Matteo Manacero and a Matthew Riddell. But if we're looking at players with a more significant sample size, Hayden Springer, I did not expect to see him up there, but also hits the ball a long way off the tee. Matty Schmid has had a really good iron profile lately, is also one of the players that carries the ball a long way. I'd be a little bit more worried about guys like a Lanto, Henrik Norlander. McNeely, by the way, he's capable of hitting the ball further than what he typically does. He usually hits the ball low to keep it more controlled off the tee. This week, though, I'd expect Mav to be hitting the ball higher and trying to carry it further. So some of these shorter guys, though, like a Griffin, Norlander, that don't have that same kind of luxury, I'd be thinking twice about before going out there and playing. But to try and find a few other guys that pop in both categories, there's a Ben Griffin, a Carson Young, who was one of the top Bet the Number plays last week and had himself a golf tournament over there at the Amex. All guys that are going to get a boost in the Bet the Number model. Around the green matters. It's maybe not the biggest deal to me this week, just because I think the ball striking is far more important, right? Making sure that you don't have a whole bunch of around the green opportunities is another way to have success around Torrey Pines. But a few guys you might want to keep an eye on. Frankie Sapin III, by the way, he is going to be an absolute stud someday. I'm talking like top 25 player in the world sort of talent. He's one of these young kids. I mean, Dunlop have been early on. A lot of these just young up and coming studs that you can just tell have that it factor. Frankie Sapin has that it factor. He's long off the tee. He makes a shit ton of putts. You can see he's pretty good around the green as well. Now, I think at a hard test like this, you probably want to stay away from him. Now, we've never seen him when you've had major championship-like conditions. Usually those young players tend to struggle their first year or so when it comes to those kind of conditions. But yeah, Sapin going in, 2-3 years from now, I think we'll be talking about him at this sort of golf course as one of maybe those top 25 plays that you'll see there in a few years. But a few other guys that pop around the green, and Harry Hall towards the top end of that list. Tony Finau, unfortunate outright pick for me last week, but hey, Sepp Straka made up for it out there at the outright that we cashed. A few other poppers around the green. 4 to 12 foot putting on these POA overseeded greens. Actually, pure POA over there on the South course this week. Also something that you can look at. And 4 to 12 feet is really where you're going to separate from the field. You saw that 5 to 10 foot range, you had so many less putts made than what you usually see out here on tour. So guys that excel there, Taylor Montgomery towards the top, unfortunately has been playing terrible golf with his ball striking lately. Norman Zhang, same thing. I don't know if I'd really be looking at him, but Harry Hall is really good putting on this POA. Same thing with Adam Svensson. Svensson's a pretty good ball striker as well. There's Pavon, who won last year. Always good to see that. There's Hostler, who had a pretty good year last year as well, popping in that category. A few guys that you maybe didn't expect to see. An O'Bear showing up there. A Sungjae Im is pretty good on this surface. A Patrick Fishburne. Now that's a huge one right there because he's long off the tee. He's top 20 in the Bet the Number model. He's He's also good from 175 to 275. And I'm not the biggest fan of him because he's been very inconsistent, especially on Saturdays and Sundays after getting into contention. But how do Torrey Pines like this? Inconsistent putters have won this event in the past, and look at all this green that we see there for Fishburne. So he kind of reminds me of Luke List. That's kind of why I wanted to point that out and I got so excited, is he's got like the same stat profile as Luke List. I mean, look at them. They look similar too. Look at their faces right next to each other there. And Luke List used to be a PXG sponsor, so you have that same hat going on there with Fishburne as well. I might have to take a little exposure out there in Fishburne this week. We'll have to see. We go over here to bogey avoidance. That's what this bogeys line is over here. That's always important at a difficult golf course like what we're going to get this week. Grazeman, believe it or not, has been really good at avoiding bogeys. Meissner, JJ Spawn, players that routinely are up there towards the top. There's Harry Hull again, who, by the way, I mean, he just keeps showing up time and time again. He might have to be somebody that we consider for some outright exposure this week. But Henrik Norlander, good at bogey avoidance. Patrick Fishburne showing up just another time. And Kirk Kitayama has sneakily been showing up in a lot of these categories as well. Par 5 scoring matters at a course where that's really where a majority of your birdie looks are going to come from. Some of your top par 5 scorers include a Max Grazeman, Rico Hoey, a lot of your bombers up here towards the top end of the list, which isn't surprising whatsoever. We'd expect the bombers to be up there towards the top, but at a course like this where you've got to go out there and make some birdies, these guys are going to get a massive leg up, and I bet the number has it as a pretty big factor in their model, but it'll be an even bigger factor in mine because when it comes to Draftkings points, when it comes to playing fantasy for this week, this is where a lot of your fantasy points are actually being generated. And then lastly, we've got the 3-putt percentage over 25 feet with the really tough green complexes that we have around the South course. Making sure that you have guys that can, lag it up near the hole is going to be useful. A little bit less important than some of these other stats, because if you're focusing on 3-putting, I think you're focusing on the wrong things when it comes to betting outrights. But guys that get a little bit of a boost there, Grazeman's good at hitting lag putts. Same thing with guys like Victor Perez. Grillo, maybe not the best putter in general, but is at least good at avoiding those 3-putts. If you can marry up this category with a bunch of other ones, then maybe you're a potential play. So like a Grazeman, it's not like the 3-putt percentage is going to put us onto Grazeman, but he showed up in bogey average. He showed up in the par 5 scoring, also that approach range. So he's a player that I'm going to have to do more of a deep dive on. And the same thing with Tony Finau. I know he was disappointing last week, but look at all this green over there. Gains with the ball striking, gains with his carry distance, around the green, par 5 scoring, and that 3-putt percentage. A few guys that you might want to throw in the back burner out there for some potential exposure. And now for a couple comp courses that should play similar to what we're going to get this week. And I think my favorite is going to be the Wells Fargo Championship from last year. It's going to be the truest championship here in 2025. But it's Quail Hollow Club, and it's a long, really difficult golf course. Not only with some tricky greens, but also a demanding off-the-tee test, which has some long rough, and also a lot of your bombers tend to succeed at. So obviously, Rory McIlroy won this last year, but really what really got me onto this, and it's how I got to Luke List outright when he ended up winning at 150-1, is Luke List has played really well around the Quail Hollow Club. It's a golf course where if you're a bomber, you have that distance off the tee, you're going to have shorter clubs into the greens, you get a distinct advantage, which is really what we're comping on here, because the agronomy is very different from golf course to golf course. But when you have a track that makes Rory McIlroy an absolute world beater, you're going to want to look at it as a comp for this kind of week. So other guys that have had some success over the last few years, you have guys like Victor Hovland showing up there, but Gary Woodland has showed up at both golf courses, this track, and then of course over there at the Farmers. You have Luke List, who finished in T6 that year. Part of the reason that I thought he was going to be a decent bet for the year after that. But if we go through a few of these different averages on here, you're going to see a lot of these like hardcore specialists showing up. Like a Tommy Fleetwood, for example, that shows up at this kind of golf course. And Aaron Wise, the same kind of thing. Really only played well at harder kind of golf courses. Wyndham Clark, bomber off the tee, but Tommy Fleetwood showing up again. It's just that sort of golf course where those bombers, those ball strikers tend to funnel up towards the top end of the board. And these kind of leaderboards, they look awfully similar to what we get at a US Open or a PGA Championship. So I think you'd look at some US Open, PGA Championship success for a little bit of quote-unquote comp course history. Of course, those travel from golf course to golf course, but you're going to get pretty similar conditions to what you get for this week, and that we sometimes see over there at the Wells Fargo Championship. And then the last one we're going to go through here is going to be the Memorial Tournament. This is another event that is extremely difficult, different part of the schedule, different agronomy-wise, but made major championship type of conditions. So you can see the top end of the leaderboard, a few guys that are a little bit shorter off the tee that show up there, but a lot of those hard condition specialists that tend to get the job done. So not a surprise to see Colin Morikawa have success there. He's also had a lot of success at this golf course in the past. Ludwig Gobert, of course, playing this week, a guy to potentially keep an eye on. There's Tony Finau over there at T8. Same thing with guys like Sanjay Hideki, who have played well around this golf course in the past. Go back to the year before that, there's Victor Hovland showing up, right? He was also showing up at our other comp course at Quail Hollow. But what you see here are a lot of grinders, a lot of guys that are long off the tee as well. Like there's Rory McIlroy, there's Scotty Scheffler, some of your elite drivers of the golf ball. And if you go to the year before that, there's Aaron Wise showing up, who, by the way, like, you're not going to see Aaron Wise anymore. I guess he's maybe moved on from professional golf, or at least as of right now, is not going out there and playing. But these courses where Aaron Wise shows up, Cognizant Classic down there in Florida, he only plays good at the really, really difficult tracks. So there are certain guys that fit that kind of description, the Aaron Wises of the world, that you might want to consider playing over here for DFS or for outrights this week. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come, including our DFS and betting preview, which will be dropping a little bit later on this week to get you ready for all of your exposure at the Farmers, as well as all the live streams throughout the weekend for Showdown for rounds 2 through 4. Those will be on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel, as well as my prop and betting live streams afterwards on my channel. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of that when it drops, as well as all the content throughout the rest of the year. Go ahead and comment down below what you guys have as the winning score for this week. And if you can end up getting that winning score correct, you will win a free month access to my Patreon page. We had a winner from last week that I'm going to go ahead and hook up with access to the site. So go ahead, guess your guess down below. It'll be first come, first serve basis. So once a score is taken once, it cannot be guessed again. So early bird gets the worm. Go ahead and comment that down below. But that's all I've got over here for the Farmers Insurance Open. Best of luck with all of your exposure this week. Let's try and make it a third outright hit in the last 4 years around the Farmers. And let's try to make it back to back. We had Sepp Straka. We talked up heavily here in the course breakdown last week. Ended up being a core play and outright that we took in our betting preview a little bit later in the week. It's take that momentum, try and ride on that here in 2025. And what better than an event that's been one of my best historically. So I'm stoked for it. Should be an absolute blast. Let's get it and let's have ourselves a week here at the Farmers.